Welcome back, folks, to episode 9 of the Running Man Self-Regulation Skill and Self-Improvement Project podcast with your host, me, Dr. Armando Dominguez, PhD in health psychology, licensed professional counselor, and also an adjunct professor at a local community college. And what we're going to be discussing today is something that is replete within the language of human beings, especially the way we speak things in English, but mostly human language involves a very pictographic, heavy, objective language such that whenever we speak, our words are things that we have reference to in pictures. So we have a lot of objective, hard references to the things that we speak about what goes on in our world. So the topic title for today is going to be the metaphor that heals, the metaphor that hurts, and the metaphor that kills. And this may seem a little heavy in parts, but part of it is just about developing a good skill in communication, so that way we can develop better preventative measures against not only stress, but anxiety, depression, for sure, and also anger. And in the most extreme part of it, the metaphor that kills, having to do with the beliefs that we develop based on those concepts that we call metaphor. Whenever something like or something is in our language, and we tend to take it as sacrosanct, we take it as fact, we take it as maybe even truth, we elevate it to truth, which is in concept like a perfection, not unlike the idea of God. You can argue for or against, doesn't matter which side you're in, you can't make it go away. And that's whenever this language exaggeration, the linguistic exaggeration, can become not only hurtful but damaging. And often whenever I have read last letters left by people, sometimes we realize that the beliefs that they had were based on things that they took to a level of inarguability and absolute, exaggerated beyond anything that would allow for hope, but also in some cases they were acting upon things that were damaging to self or others, and that level of finality is frightening. So why do I want to add this to what I'm doing with the podcast? Because I believe it's a very important thing that if we stop early, we can prevent problems. But also, it's not about the most extreme, always about lethality, but that gives us context. That gives us a sense of, compared to this, whether it be death or injury or something along those lines, then everything else tends to take its place in the order that it should, in the way that things aren't exaggerated, and we can look at things objectively, non-judgmentally, and factually, so that we can devise a plan or an idea as to how to manage things in our life without getting hung up in the whys and the opinions of. Whenever we have emotional opinions and get into the whys of things, we get into this mental loop that is hard to get out of, because the emotional is irrational. We tend to keep feeling those things, and because it's uncomfortable, we see that our best reasoning falls short in our ability to get us out of those emotional loops. These are thinking processes that bring on those really bad feelings in the body, yes. But they're hard to stop, and we have to ride them out, because often if they're hormonally driven, that means it's something that gets excreted in the blood. It's not merely just a neurotransmitter that's an electrochemical charge that once it's on, it's done, it's off, just like a switch. Just like anything that we would have, such as blood sugar that comes from the food that we eat, has to be metabolized, and it takes time. So whenever you have feels, you notice that you don't just cool down, that it kind of lingers with you and you stay in that state, and it's uncomfortable. Same thing whenever you're dopey happy, you tend to laugh and it's like, okay, everyone else isn't laughing, but I am. And you wind down and they might shame and guilt you because you're not acting socially appropriately within a certain context or paradigm, but yet you're still feeling the good goofiness that's going on inside of you before you realize, oh, something else is going on. And the fun and the good feel stays with you for a time. We talk about a few minutes, sometimes hours, sometimes days. So we'll discuss some of that as well. But to reiterate the topic, the metaphor that heals, the metaphor that hurts, and the metaphor that kills. We'll start with our language and how we speak of things. Whenever we discuss things to people, often we'll say, wow, that such and such is as big as a truck, big as a house. Are they really? Well, no, it's an exaggeration in terms, but we wouldn't call it out, and we wouldn't necessarily say somebody's a liar because they speak that way. But it is part of our language that helps us be a little more smooth in our communication, and it tends to allow us to make points of what it is we're wanting to emphasize by exaggerating the mental picture, so to speak, that we're seeding within the individual that is listening to the words we're speaking. So it is a measure of influence. That doesn't mean because somebody speaks and they use metaphors that they're trying to control you. Not anything like that, even though there are those that do that. For the most part, it's a natural part of how we speak. It smooths things out. We're not absolutely perfectly factual. Often whenever you hear a good story, there is a metaphorical quality often to parts and pieces that we may be describing in a story. Or whenever we're telling a joke, there are exaggerations that make the story funny, and we are painting a picture in the mind of others with the language we speak. So, question is, how is this a self-regulatory skill? And how can I use this? That's a good question. Those are two good questions, actually. Well, the way this becomes a self-regulatory skill is becoming aware of when we use the metaphorical language and being more careful, especially if things are tense, when not to use metaphorical language. If we take into consideration what we've discussed about hyperarousal and stress and using of the square breath in episode 2, the lack of blood flow to the front part of our brain, that's our reasoner, means that we actually have marginalized our bestest of our best capacity to think our way through and realize, well, they didn't mean that. Or if they did, they're just trying to get a rise out of me. Or, worse yet, they want me to believe something so they can sell me something I don't want. Control and manipulation. And this isn't something that just salesmen do. These are things that even children learn how to do, and you don't necessarily have to teach them. When we learn how to develop survival advantage by telling a story and exaggerating and emphasizing, then we realize that we can gain benefit if we have somebody believe in our story and support our cause. When little kids do googly eyes, they learn how to do that to create influence to maybe get another cookie from mom. Whatever the situation is, we're looking at how we develop influence through communication, and soon enough, we learn how to tell a story. And the story is what sticks in us, in our mind, because we have certain visual images and pictures that are given to us. Often, whenever we see people, whenever we're little, we tend to look at them and they're larger than us and there's influence there. There's a biological feel of things whenever things are looming and bigger than us, and we tend to possibly be intimidated if it's a negative thing, or even frightened. And how we remember that can become an exaggeration, but how we describe that is led by the feelings. Often we will exaggerate that memory by trying to describe the ineffable and the unspeakable, in the sense that it's from the wordless level of mind. It's from the perceptual level that maybe at the time, if we were frightened when we were a child, we didn't have words for. But we definitely have an experience of quickening heart racing and fear and this sort of thing, and a great deal of dislike and not knowing why. So in this vein, the metaphor, whenever it's positive, the metaphor that heals, often whenever we speak of somebody, oh, they're so cute, they're a little angel, oh, they're so beautiful, like a little princess, or even, they're such a good person, could never see them even hurting a fly, this sort of thing. We're telling a narrative based in picture that has a quality of belief that goes with that, and that belief is founded on some of the good feelings that come along with that, so we couple those things. Now, where does the metaphor heal? Often, depending on the strength of belief, we can create change in the body, like the lemon example that we use. If we do that, or even think about a favorite food, we can cause salivation, even gustation, in the sense that we have stomach growling and expectation of food. We may not have it there, but just the remembrance of, or the recall, or even the hopeful predictive expectation of, I'm going to go to the steakhouse and maybe I'll get some shrimp and steak, a little surf and turf or whatever. But yet we have, and I'm doing this right now, luckily you can't see me salivating a little bit because I'm thinking of those food objects that exist somewhere in space. Not yet, because I haven't gone to the steakhouse, but soon I would hope. But yet our bodies respond, my body's responding right now to that. So how does this heal? Whenever we have a sense of comfort or even a picture of things getting better, our body responds in that way. There have been a number of studies that have been done that support psychosomatic illness, psychosomatic healing. There was one that was documented that was really, really curious to me, and it was a book by Milton Erickson. And he was discussing the use of hypnotic suggestion. Now, Erickson often would go and do what was called a handshake induction, and most of the folks that knew of him, he actually is the person that got hypnosis recognized as an actual medical modality back in the 1950s. Those people that knew of him and knew him and his reputation refused to shake hands with him because he was so skilled at the handshake induction that most people did not realize if they were suggestible that it was too late once he touched your hand. And much of it had to do with the language and the words that he spoke when he was leading you up to that. So he was able to create change. But also there was the case that was related, I believe it was to him, I could be incorrect on this, but a documented case of a person had extreme case of warts all over their body, and the doctors had pretty much given up on trying to treat this person. They didn't know what else to do. They let the hypnosis session go on. They said, hey, what the heck, let's do this. And the hypnotist came in, did the hypnosis session with the individual that had finally said, I'll do anything. They were desperate. Which that, in consideration, means that this person had no resistance. And the next day, there was an improvement. And I believe that within that week, within several days that the warts had receded, the body had healed itself. There are a lot of miraculous cures, and I'm not trying to sell woo or that sort of thing, but I am telling you that there are cases documented as a result of how we hold and believe things. And sometimes it takes somebody that's an authority or somebody to speak to us in a way that we can touch those things that are our resistance that can create change. There are many that have done meditation and seeing visualizations of healing and bones healing faster than normal. Not anything incredibly miraculous in the sense that one day to the next, but wherever the healing factor was accelerated, 5-10 times sometimes. And these are documented as well. But interesting that, how we think of things. If I'm seeing a visualization that is a functional metaphor, may not involve words per se, but rather the description that is given as the visualization is a given metaphor. Whenever you might see the light moving through your body, or seeing a good feeling moving through your body like a mist or a gas, but yet it's floating up through yourself. And we know we're not hollow in that sense bodily, but yet people relax and get a very pleasurable sense of doing things if they find the visualization pleasurable. So I'm not saying one causes the other, but I am telling you that there's definitely an effect. And with many of the anecdotal instances that people report and document, as much smoke, there's fire. What the exact reasons are, we're still not sure. But even in the age of the neuroscience and the brain imaging that we do now, we see areas light up, but we still don't have something that we can call cause and effect, but yet we still use it. And these are things that many disciplines, Taoist meditations and Zen meditation, even some of the meditations that came out of the West from Europe, use the mind and mind pictures. So the use of metaphor is very old, but also one that I would think precedes culture. Looking at whenever we used to put images on cave walls and whatnot to communicate before we developed formalized language, so to speak. So at least within the last 60, 70,000 years, we've somehow used mental pictures within our language to communicate, and that's very powerful. Now, the metaphor that hurts. Whenever somebody speaks things over us, and this is something that often a lot of religious folks like to use, and I'm using this because it's a very accurate term. Because over means that there's an assumption of either size, elevation, or power over or above self, in this case. And whenever we have children, how often do we give prescriptions? Don't do this, or you have to do that and do it in this way. How often do we hear ourselves saying things that are descriptive? Well, don't do that because you're going to get really fat. Don't do that because you're going to get big as a house, this sort of thing. Or you shouldn't do that, or you're going to turn out into what your relatives are, and you know that they're just rats or they're criminals. And we have mental pictures that we're seeding in our little ones often, and it's done because we are projecting our fears onto them. And we can speak to them and teach them, and we lead by example. One of the things that we forget is that instead of using the metaphorical controls that we tend to spew at people and that we speak over our children sometimes, we're doing damage unawares, because the damage may not happen right now. But the damage may be mental and emotional, a double bind, a catch-22, that often people complain about, that they know that they need to do something, but for something other than what they can explain within themselves is stopping them. They can't. They can't do it. Something's holding them back, but they don't know what it is. That may in actuality be one of these double binds that is holding us back because we hear something that's irrational. But yet at the same time, our feelings are holding us back and our body is experiencing the discomfort of, I can't do that, or else I'll become maybe that picture of the rat. Maybe I'll become big as a house. Maybe I'll turn into whatever it is that parents do, telling their kids not to do. So those fears, even though you may not have said anything terrible, may not make the best of sense whenever it comes to crunch time, when the stress comes up. And these may be the things that limit us from succeeding at the things that maybe we want our children to. And we wind up wondering why we're so frustrated trying to see them go when we can see them and the goal, and we don't see what's blocking them. It's like an invisible barrier. So the metaphor that hurts, often things that we speak aren't factual if they're that important. My encouragement to people, if you're speaking to friends, to peers, to even co-workers, people that are angry in particular, and children, when we're parenting them, we're all suggestible. But what is it that we're suggesting? The suggestion that I'm meaning has to do with something that we want them to do, and often we will use a verbal exaggeration or a metaphor to get a point across. Because really what we're trying to do is let them know how this makes us feel, or how uncomfortable our feelings are. And I have no other way to tell you other than use a picture word or picture narrative. That is a close approximation, but it's not the truth nor the fact of what you're experiencing. But yet we're passing it off in language as a bind or a control or as a navigation device to get people to act within a certain way. So what can I do to prevent the metaphor that hurts? One is to speak factually. What is it that you see? How is it that you want it done if you're going to be teaching your kiddos? Where is it? When is it? The how to do it, give instructions. The when not to, give a time. That's okay. But minimizing the metaphorical will actually minimize the ambiguities later, trying to understand what the hell is this? Whenever you're giving yourself the self-talk, wondering, why can't I do this? Why do I see that? It looks so easy. I've done it different times, but now, for some reason, it takes on a different meaning when there's more emotion, and I can't do it. Then we start hearing that word can't. The very thing that coaches tell us, don't let that ever come out of your mouth. Because everything that you say, you're speaking over yourself. And if you tell yourself you can, you're correct. You tell yourself you can't, you're equally as correct. So our speech is very powerful in our self-talk. And the metaphor is what we seed into the self-talk of others. So we have to be careful. Factual is best. So next, this is the heavier part. And this is the metaphor that kills. Now, the metaphor that heals, the metaphor that hurts, both of these are founded in the objective narrative words that we use to build the language, speech, communication, code, message that we're trying to give. But the metaphor that kills is very, very much the same. But often this is whenever an incomplete idea is never corrected. Whenever we have somebody that we tell something emotionally and we inflect that and they get hurt feelings. So therefore there's a connection there that's a little stronger than any other thing would otherwise because of the emotional load. If somebody is spoken to whenever they're vulnerable, when they are stressed, when they're angry, when they're anxious, when they're in fight, flight, the words that stick are not the don'ts and the no's and the uhs and the negatives. Our brain can't really process a negative in the sense that we know that it belongs in our language. But if you can point out a no or a don't or a not in our physical world, like you would point at a stool or a sofa or a sofa cushion, then show me. You'll realize that there aren't any objective things that you could point at that mean no. And I don't mean that red circle with the little line across that says no, kind of like the say no to drugs thing. That's not it. That is a symbol that we tie to a language. But there is a stool out in the world. Yes, I can physically pick up a stool, touch it, and find one, sell one, buy one. And I could touch it with my hands and experience it objectively. But you can't experience a no, a don't, or a not. Okay, a negation, we can't. So when we speak to somebody, what's left when we take that out, we say, don't hurt yourself. Don't drink too much. Don't do this. Don't do that. All that's left is the statement in emphasis. If you're telling someone, listen, don't jump off the cliff or don't jump off of the top of the stairs because you're going to get hurt, what's left? Without the don't jump off the cliff. Without the no. Without the negation, jump off the cliff. Jump off the top of the stair. And we wonder why sometimes kids impulsively are trying to make sense of stuff. Part of it's because we're speaking to their mind at the visual level, this isn't a cure or a stop, but this is something that's helpful when talking to kiddos about things that we'd rather have them do, which means we have to redirect attention. Sometimes waving at somebody before they jump off the stair will catch their attention away from them jumping off the stair. Just an idea that I've seen work and I've seen other people use as well, but redirection, changing the focus. Often it's the visual focus. Sometimes it's changing the state of mind by an abrupt sound like, hey, calling them out, snapping a finger, or even calling somebody's name will shift their focus and attention. So the metaphor that kills is where the metaphor takes on a very heavy emotional load, but also there's a value. Often it's tied to an authority. If a parent, for instance, or somebody that's a boss, or a girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, husband, or somebody that you care about says something that's very hurtful or painful, we tend to hold on to that. Notice the word description, hold, as if I have these conceptual arms that are holding this idea. My language is objective language. Because there are arms out there, but am I holding an idea? Not really. It's an abstract idea. So it exists in the subjective level, which means our mind, our level of mind and our thinking. But it's based in something out in reality because there's a hurt out there that I'm holding on to. Maybe somebody says something about performance as a husband, as a child, as a son, as a worker, as a friend. Maybe I failed. I remember years back, I wasn't a really good friend at one point in time, just a little self-disclosure. And I remember how uncomfortable I felt whenever my friend's dad had passed. I didn't know how to respond. At that point, I had never been in a position to be supportive of someone that had lost a parent. He was much younger than I was. I remember he told me how disappointed he was at me as an individual because I wasn't there when he needed me. I get it now. But in this sense, it stuck to me. It stayed with me for a very long time. But at the same time, he told me, you were never there when I was needing you, using an absolute. So that kind of stuck. He didn't do it to hurt me, but he did tell me how it hurt him by not being there, mine not being there. So just an important thing to point out, that often the language that we speak isn't done to hurt, but it sticks. So we just have to be mindful. So what about those really negative metaphors that people take with them that cause them to act? Part of it is that if there's a huge emotional load and we ruminate, we tend to create a stronger contact, a stronger path, more neurological synaptic connections, actual neurons firing and growing around those areas that are the typical response. So we get practiced at it. And if we think those things long enough, hard enough, then we develop beliefs and behaviors that are much harder to stop. They become second nature. In the learning model, when we become unconsciously competent, that's mastery. That means we do it now so easily. It's like falling down. Can't stop it. It's like pouring water. Too easy. It's simply like breathing. It's every day. And those are each ingraining the recall of an event or a metaphor or the feelings that are along those lines that we believe so strongly because of, that often we feel like we can't get away from it. I don't know how many of y'all can run from your head, but I know I can't. And most of us, when we have a memory, that is what we're doing. We're trying to run from our head because within our mind, within our head where our mind exists, where we're braining this thinking process, it's really negative and uncomfortable. Everywhere I go, it goes with me. I might create a hiatus, but this is where we start seeing things like self-medication, excessive use of alcohol, use of drugs, use of other things to get good feelings, because whenever I'm not doing those things, I'm escaping. When I'm not doing those things, I feel bad like this, or these thoughts keep popping up because I practice them so much It's almost like we can't not do it, like breathing. You can hold your breath for a time, but at some point, your body's going to override and say, okay, ding dong, you better breathe because this isn't good. Or it'll let you pass out and then wake you up and then you realize, I'm breathing. Notice what I did. I used a metaphor. Ding dong. Does that remind you of a bell? It's a negative. It's a pejorative. I did that on purpose to illustrate a point that even our self-talk, when we speak to ourselves, becomes negative. To add on to the negative that we may have brought on by someone else's words over time, that I reiterated over and over and practiced, and now it's no longer them, it's my own mind. And let's say we grew up in a really negative situation where we're always having negative spoken over us. And when we speak to people, the self-judgment is there. And this isn't picking on parents, but many times I have heard that growing up with mom, dad, grandpa that raised me because of whatever situation, I would always hear them berate me, say negative things and bad things about me, that I'll never turn out to be anything, you'll never be any good. And whenever they judge themselves, it automatically knee-jerks that response whenever they make a mistake, and they judge themselves based on the mistake, using a measurement or an adjudication, a judgment that they got from someone else that wasn't theirs, that they've essentially hijacked and borrowed and used because that's what they learned. But at the same time, when we stop and think about it, it's like, well, that's not what I think about myself, but that's what I learned I'm supposed to tell myself whenever I make a mistake, when I fail, when I fall, or I do something that's wrong. We are judging ourselves by someone else's measure. And when we get to be adult enough to realize, well, they were just trying to correct me, or, yeah, they were really mean, or they're really trying to hurt me, when they were really just trying to control me, or maybe they were just really mean, which that happens too, then why am I doing this to myself? Because at some level, the next jump in reasoning is, well, if they saw me this way and someone else said that, it must be true. Well, that's the reasonable adjudication, I guess. But that's also what we call the reductionist view, wherever, if it's just this, well, they just thought about me that way, just. In quotes. Flexing my air quotes here. The term just is a reduction, but also minimizing the potential possibilities that exist and paring down to the simplest, this is a fact. And it takes this to the level of assumption. I'm assuming it to be correct because the people that raised me, that were older than me at the time, not taking into consideration that I really have to rethink this, because that now I'm older, now I'm an individual, now I've differentiated myself, and no, I don't agree with it, and I hated that they treated me that way. It's okay to have those thoughts and those feelings about being treated that way. But yet, whenever we're thinking that way, the assumptive reasoning pops up right after, almost as if to keep it in motion. It's almost a self-perpetuating, self-protective measure for the thought itself, it seems. It's not, but I'm just giving you an idea. Notice I said it seems, because we have a choice in the matter, and we can't change that. But whenever we think about things in that way, often people will say, you're just this, or I'm just that. I'm just weak, or I am bad. Notice the term in quotes, I. That means there's an ownership and association with. And if anyone's ever done any kind of counseling or therapy, and this is something that a lot of the special folks out there that get the lingo, they get the therapeutic speak and throw it about. And I'm talking about professionals as well that are trying to do well for themselves, but yet they throw this around whenever they talk about using I statements versus you statements. If you speak something as an I, it is more associative, self-associated, whereas you is almost a projection or a distance or separation from an accountability or responsibility for how one feels or what's going on. And whenever we say I, it's a little harder. And it is, because it kind of stresses our ego strength and makes us feel like I'm somehow a little less because, oh, I messed up. If I say that, that means it's my fault and I got to do something about it. That means I've admitted it. Admission, wow, that sounds hard, doesn't it? But that's what it kind of unravels into. But when we go into the term just, that's truly a reduction to the most simple. It is a distillation of a situation to the most simple labeling or pointing and blaming of, to the detriment and rejection of any other possibilities. Which means I'm willing to think about this and be efficient in cutting down the amount of thinking I need to do, because that would take some energy, mental energy. That could leave me tired and maybe lead me to a nap, which isn't all a bad thing. But whenever a metaphor develops the feelings that one feels like one can't get away, that one is implicated, one is blamed, and one is that, and one associates it as I am that, then it's become a very powerful suggestion. Is it hypnosis? Yeah, one could say that. Hypnosis isn't a bad thing, but the suggestibility of it, very powerful, very impactful, and transformative. When people get discouraged and depressed, when people get angry, we're more apt to be suggestible. And it's not always the words that are spoken, but our environment, if it's particularly stressful, in which the suggestion is, this is a strange and dangerous place, and I don't feel safe. Notice I'm putting words to this, but it doesn't mean that the environment is telling you that in words. But at the feeling perceptual level, it is. And we tend to take that, interpret it, and add words to it to make sense of it. And often it will change and adjust the way we behave. We may not go a certain place because of that. We may stop doing certain things because of the feelings we have because of it. But also over time, depression, anger, upset, we have some actual morphological body changes that occur as a result of chronic stress, chronic depression, chronic anxiety, chronic feelings of anger and unsafety. The symptoms of hypercortisolism have a lot to do with how, if cortisol in the body occurs because of chronic stress, it becomes corrosive to our inner structures. The smooth muscle that is in our venous and arterial structures, our cardiac muscle, our skeletal muscle starts to fall apart in a sense. It starts to get more easily damaged whenever we're trying to be active. We just have a general sense of unwellness if we can't shake it because we're in chronic stress, and we get depressed. And then we start having depressive thoughts as a result of our body depressing because we have this learned helplessness response that says, I can't get away from this and I can't leave my kids. There's a social bind. I'm not telling you to leave your kids, but what I'm telling you is those sorts of things run through, and they're like countermeasures to the things that would help us not be stressed in some cases. Often we're so habituated to that even whenever we're not in chronic stress, if we had been at one point, little stressors will bring us back up. That means we've lost a sense of resilience in our body. Part of that has to do with heart rate variability. Now, this is something I'm going to plug, not because I get money or kickback. I don't. It's just that I've used this tool. And Heart Math Institute has quite a number of things out there that you can use, a computer program, also the little modules that you can put on your earlobe and your finger and measure your heart rate and general tension, this sort of stuff. But I used to use this clinically, and I used to use it myself for martial arts training, deeper meditation, whenever I was going to school and working 3 jobs sometimes, that I had to maximize my recovery and sleep, which sometimes was an hour and a half to 3 hours in a day during semesters, which I went to school year round for years, and it took its toll on me. But this is one of the things that through Heart Math, I was able to manage my measure of stress by intention alone. No mantras, no special breathing, even though I did do a lot of breathing methods. But it helped me see, biofeedback-wise, what I was doing was actually having an effect. And Heart Math has quite a few things. Once again, I'm not plugging them because I'm getting a kickback. This is just me telling you this is good, useful tool to help us manage the physical stress part that is hard to be able to verbalize sometimes. But by learning skills and by intention, we can actually make a difference in ourselves. But back to what I was saying about the metaphor that kills. When somebody has left letters after they've hurt themselves permanently, erase themselves from existence. That are letters. I've seen some of these, and it's very telling and even hard to recall sometimes, because I certainly had a heart for people, and it's hard to think about that. But the reality is, often they would leave a message that says, I couldn't do this anymore because they believed there was no way out, there was no change, there's no help, nobody cared. Notice what I'm doing. I'm saying things in absolutes. That has a component of belief that is so elevated that it's inarguable. And depending on how bad they felt, that was their evidence. So the metaphors that we use, often when we speak metaphor, we're speaking linguistics and stories, and it's so fun and exciting and so juicy when we're reading something just fascinating. And I love reading, and those are fun things. But whenever we speak in our day-to-day life, we have to realize that sometimes we speak things over ourselves. Someone speaks something over us, and when we associate with it and call it I am that, or say I am that, I have indelibly left a mark on myself that will be hard to change if it's a negative. Equally, if you give somebody a positive, it'll do as much, because we're speaking to the picture level of the brain. And yes, it is a word, and yes, it goes through a higher cognitive process, but those picture associations go deeply into us and create change in our body, and can be used to help us out. And we have to be aware that we can't let things run as a program. And these are like a computer program. Just like we have computer language, we have our own mental biocomputer language that starts with the pictures before we ever have words. Because at the just processing level, it's about approach, avoid. Is it believable? Is it not? And if it's a stick that looks like a snake, I'm going to jump back. And then when I realize it's just a stick, I can go back and laugh at it. But fact of the matter is, we have a component of belief. We're naturally wired to believe, to increase our possibilities of survival. And to answer the question that I mentioned in the other podcast, why always is it about death, danger, and that sort of thing? It gives us context. And once again, I'm completing the ideas that I started with intentionally, leaving incomplete so we can more fully complete them as we go along to create a better understanding. But whenever we have a high level of suggestibility, we tend to increase our survivability as well, but sometimes that can run amok. But the metaphor, the mental pictures, very important stuff. And there are things that are replete within our language, and at some point we're going to revisit this again, pertinent to what it is that we discuss as we move forward. But this was a particularly in-depth look into the language and how we speak, the use of metaphor. And I will leave you with an idea that we can think about. I had a friend that I used to train with, and he eloquently named it archetyping. And an archetype is something that Carl Jung spoke about. That was kind of like a universal mental picture of sorts that we had of things that were deeply seated in our subconscious that we shared within the universal mind. So it was a deep concept. But in the practical sense, whenever we have somebody come into our life, or that we're playing with, or that we're enjoying, in my case it was doing martial arts, we were discussing how we categorize people. Well, he's the plumber, he's the fighter, he's the jock, he's the nerd, he's the, or she, or whomever. But we give somebody a label and a name. We archetype them to make them more easily assimilated into our minds and our lives, and what we understand as the individuals that they are and the space they occupy in our world. So, do we archetype people? How do I do that? Is it a negative judgment? Sometimes it is. Is it a positive thing? And why a mental picture? And does it make sense? Does it serve? Does it help? Does it hurt? And the last one, could it kill? Left alone long enough incorrectly, would you want somebody to run with an idea like that? And how far would it go if they weren't well? These are rhetorical questions, not anything to answer. Even though if you want to email me, please do. at runningmangetskills project@gmail. This is a very important topic once again. And I'm going to go and tell you that that's probably about it for tonight. And I'm glad that we had a chance to visit about this, because this is a very important thing. And this is something that usually I teach over several months to some of my college classes to help them understand the impact of the people that struggle with substance use, substance abuse, and also dual diagnosis counseling issues. But things that also we run around with every day, and it's not a mental illness thing. This is a mental function thing amongst all people, regardless of where we come from. Thanks for the time. I really enjoyed visiting with you and discussing this topic very deep, but also more to it, of course, and we'll discuss it again as we move forward with the podcast. And I certainly appreciate your time, and just want to tell you, hey, follow, share, subscribe, and share this with people that you think may benefit, because I think everyone speaks in metaphors at some point. They may get something out of it. But this also kind of helps with the kiddos and help them understand when the metaphor is helpful and useful, and when speaking factually is more useful and helpful. And I appreciate your time once again. You take care. Good night.